The ex-wife became the queen, but the villain returned with an army to steal her crown. Isabel Greer thought the war was over. She thought that by buying her ex-husband's debt and taking his company, she had secured safety for her twin boys. She believed the silence of the last year was the sound of peace. But she was wrong. The silence wasn't peace. It was the deep breath a predator takes before the pounce. And by the time the champagne glasses shattered at her anniversary gala, she would realize that the man she destroyed was the only one who could save her from the woman who wanted her dead. Hi, my beautiful story family. Welcome home to Mr. James Stories. If no one has asked you today, let me be the first to ask, how is your spirit? I know we often carry burdens that are invisible to the world, smiling while our shoulders are heavy. But here, in this quiet corner of the internet, you can set that weight down. You are seen, you are worthy, and you are stronger than you know. Before we witness this battle, receive this prayer over your life. May the enemies plotting against you in the dark be exposed by the light. May the traps set for your feet become the stepping stones for your elevation. And may you find, in your hour of greatest need, that help comes from the most unexpected places. If you receive that protection today, type, "I am covered," in the comments so I know my family is with me. Family, before we begin, I have a small request. There are forces in this world that hate to see the underdog win. They want you to believe that justice is a fantasy. Help me prove them wrong. If you believe that truth always rises, subscribe and turn on notifications. Don't let the algorithm hide these stories from you. Stay close to the fire so you don't get left in the cold. Let's begin with love always. The air in the grand ballroom of the Greer Cane Tower didn't smell like oxygen. It smelled of ozone, white orchids, and the crisp, metallic scent of absolute power. It was the one-year anniversary of the hostile takeover, a night the press had dubbed the Phoenix Gala. 300 of Chicago's most elite power brokers stood beneath the crystal chandeliers, their conversations a low, expensive hum that vibrated against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Outside, the city was a grid of gold and black, a chessboard that Isabel Greer had mastered. Inside, she stood on the mezzanine balcony, looking down at her kingdom. Isabel wore white. It was a deliberate choice. A year ago, at Dominic's wedding, she had worn midnight blue velvet to signify judgment. Tonight, in a structural silk gown that looked more like architecture than clothing, she was a blank slate, untouchable and serene. She swirled the sparkling water in her glass. She never drank alcohol at company events, and watched the crowd. They were drinking her champagne, eating her caviar, and laughing at her jokes. These were the same people who had shunned her when Dominic threw her out 10 years ago. Now, they fought for a moment of her time. "They look like ants from up here," a quiet voice said. Isabel didn't turn. She knew the cadence of that voice better than her own heartbeat. "Ants can strip a carcass in an hour if you let them, Leo. Never underestimate the colony." Her son, Leo, stepped up to the railing beside her. At 11 years old, he had grown taller, his features sharpening into a terrifying replica of his father's, but with Isabel's watchful stillness. His brother, Julian, stood on her other side, tapping furiously on a tablet that was synchronized with the building's security grid. They weren't wearing tuxedos tonight. They were in dark, bespoke suits that made them look like miniature board members. "Security is tight," Julian murmured, not looking up from his screen. "I've flagged 3 paparazzi trying to bribe the catering staff and 1 corporate spy from Vance Industries recording audio near the bar. I neutralized their feeds." Isabel placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. "Relax tonight, my love. We won. This is the victory lap." "Victory is temporary," Julian countered, his dark eyes scanning the room below. "The market is volatile." Isabel smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through her iron mask. They were so serious, her little soldiers. They had grown up too fast, forged in the trauma of rejection, and while she was proud of their brilliance, she sometimes missed the childhood they never really had. She was about to tell them to go steal some truffles from the dessert table when the heavy double doors at the entrance of the ballroom slammed open. It wasn't a normal entrance. The doors hit the stoppers with a violence that cracked the plaster. The music, a live string quartet playing Vivaldi, died instantly. The hum of conversation ceased as 300 heads turned in unison toward the intrusion. The wind from the hallway blew into the room, cold and biting, carrying a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Standing in the doorway was a phalanx of men in dark gray suits. They weren't police. They weren't security. They wore the distinct, predatory uniform of federal process servers and high-end corporate litigators. And leading them, wearing a dress of blood-red satin that clashed violently with the elegant white decor, was a ghost. Isabel gripped the railing, her knuckles turning white. It had been a year of silence, a year of rebuilding. She had thought Serafina Sterling had fled to Europe or buried herself in shame after being exposed as a fraud at the wedding. But the woman standing in the doorway didn't look ashamed. She looked wealthy. She looked dangerous. And she was smiling. Next to Serafina stood a man Isabel recognized only from the terrified whispers of her legal team. Alastair Graves, the corporate reaper. A man who didn't buy companies, he gutted them. He was tall, gaunt, with skin that looked like it had never seen the sun and eyes that were dead flat. "Cut the music," Serafina shouted, her voice shrill and triumphant, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Party's over, everyone. I hope you saved your receipts." Isabel didn't run. She didn't hide. She descended the marble staircase, her heels clicking a steady rhythm that sounded like gunshots in the silence. The twins flanked her, moving with her like shadows. She stopped 5 steps from the bottom, using the height to look down at the intruders. "You're trespassing, Serafina," Isabel said, her voice calm, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "And frankly, that dress is a crime in itself. Did you rob a crime scene on your way here?" A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd, but it died quickly when Alastair Graves stepped forward. He held up a thick document bound in blue leather. "Ms. Greer," Graves said, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "We aren't trespassing. We are reclaiming stolen property. I own this building," Isabel stated. "I own the debt. I own the deed. You obtained it through fraud," Graves countered, signaling the men behind him. They fanned out, moving toward the exits, blocking the guests from leaving. "This is a federal injunction, Ms. Greer. As of 8 p.m. tonight, Judge Thornton has signed an order freezing all assets related to Greer-Kane Dynamics. Your accounts are locked. Your key cards are deactivated. And this building is now a crime scene under the jurisdiction of the court-appointed receivership." Isabel felt a cold pit open in her stomach. "On what grounds?" Serafina stepped forward, her red lips peeling back in a sneer. "Corporate espionage, darling. Wire fraud. Insider trading." She looked up at Isabel, her eyes dancing with malice. "We have proof that you didn't buy Dominic's debt legally. We have proof you stole the data. And the best part? We have a witness." "There are no witnesses to a lie," Isabel said, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Oh, but there is," Serafina laughed, a sound that made the hair on Isabel's arms stand up. "Someone who knows exactly how you operate. Someone who is very eager to clear his conscience." She snapped her fingers. One of the servers handed her a tablet. She turned it around so Isabel, and the twins, could see the screen. It was a legal affidavit, signed and notarized. Isabel squinted at the signature at the bottom. The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to dissolve. The name on the line was written in a handwriting she had once loved, a handwriting she thought she had erased from her life. "Dominic Kane. He's suing you." "Isabel," Serafina whispered, the venom dripping from every syllable. "He's claiming you set him up. And since he's the victim, he's joined our lawsuit. We're taking it all back. The company. The money." She looked at the twins, her gaze lingering on them with a hunger that made Isabel want to scream. "And the custody." Little did Isabel know, as she stood frozen on the stairs, that the signature on the screen wasn't just a betrayal. It was a trap. Dominic hadn't signed that document willingly, and the war Serafina had just started would not be fought in the boardroom. It would be fought in the shadows, on the run, and it would require Isabel to trust the one man she had sworn to hate forever. Isabel looked at Julian. The boy was typing frantically on his tablet. He looked up, his face pale. "Mom," he whispered. "It's real. The accounts, they just went to zero." The word zero has a sound. It is not silent. To Isabel, it sounded like the sudden, deafening crack of a support beam snapping in a burning building. She looked at Julian's tablet, watching the numbers that represented her life's work blink out of existence, replaced by a string of null sets. Her personal accounts, the company operating funds, the offshore reserves, all gone. "This is a mistake," Isabel said, though her voice lacked the conviction of the queen she had been 5 minutes ago. She looked up at Alistair Graves. My lawyers will have this lifted within the hour. You can't just seize $1 billion corporation based on an affidavit. Graves stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of sterile antiseptic and old paper. It isn't just an affidavit, Ms. Greer. It's a RICO predicate. Under federal law, when a company is accused of being purchased with the proceeds of wire fraud, the government has the right to freeze the asset to prevent liquidation. He smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. We didn't just sue you. We requested an emergency receivership. I am not just the plaintiff's husband. As of this evening, I am the court-appointed caretaker of Greer Kane Dynamics. Isabel turned to her head of security, Henderson. The large man who had thrown Dominic out of the garden a year ago was standing by the service entrance, his hand on his earpiece. Henderson, Isabel commanded, pointing at Graves. Remove these trespassers. Now. Henderson didn't move. He looked at Isabel, then at the federal agents standing behind Graves. He slowly took his earpiece out and placed it on the tray of a passing waiter. I can't do that, Ms. Greer, Henderson said, his voice heavy with apology. They have a warrant. If I touch him, I go to jail. The betrayal hit her harder than the lawsuit. The loyalty she thought she had purchased was just another rental. Serafina laughed, the sound sharp and grating. Oh, don't look so shocked, Isabel. Everyone has a price. You taught us that. She waved a hand toward the exit. Now get out. You're trespassing on private property. Isabel looked at the 300 guests. The senators, the investors, the friends. Not one of them stepped forward. They were already pulling out their phones, distancing themselves, calculating the social cost of being seen with a fraud. The room was spinning. We're leaving, Isabel said, grabbing Leo and Julian by the hands. Her grip was tight, a silent promise that she wouldn't let them fall. But don't get comfortable, Serafina. I know how to evict squatters. Take your time, Graves called after her as she marched toward the doors. But leave the company phone. And the jewelry. Those are assets of the receivership. Isabel paused at the door. She unclasped the diamond necklace she was wearing, the same one she had worn to the wedding, and dropped it onto the floor. It landed with a heavy thud. She didn't look back as she walked out, but she didn't know that by the time she reached the lobby, the humiliation upstairs would feel like a mercy compared to what was waiting for her on the street. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent. The mirrored walls reflected a woman who looked like a queen, but Isabel felt like a refugee. Julian was still typing furiously on his tablet, his thumbs moving at a blur. They locked the cloud backups. Julian whispered, his brow furrowed. But I managed to clone the local server to a ghost drive before they cut the connection. We have the data, Mom. But we can't access the money. We don't need money yet, Isabel said, smoothing her silk dress. We need an exit. The elevator doors opened, and the noise hit them like a physical blow. The lobby wasn't empty. It was packed with photographers. The flashbulbs erupted into a blinding stroboscopic wall of white light. Questions were shouted over the din, overlapping into a chaotic roar. Is it true you forged the documents? Did Dominic really testify against you? Isabel, are you going to prison? Isabel instinctively pulled the boys behind her, shielding them with her body. She pushed through the glass revolving doors into the cold night air. The valet stand was just ahead. My car, she snapped at the young attendant, holding out her ticket. Bring it around. Now. The valet looked down at his shoes. He was trembling. I can't, Ms. Greer. The tow truck just left with it. Mr. Graves' office called. They said it was company property. Isabel stared at the empty spot where her Rolls-Royce had been. They had stripped her of everything in less than 20 minutes. The paparazzi were closing in, a circle of sharks sensing blood. She had no car, no security, and no home to retreat to. Walk, Isabel whispered to the twins. Don't run. Don't cover your faces. Let them see you. Let them see that we aren't afraid. They walked. It was 12 blocks to their penthouse. The wind whipped off Lake Michigan, cutting through Isabel's thin silk gown, freezing her skin. But she didn't shiver. She walked with her head high, the clicks of the cameras following her every step. A reporter thrust a microphone into her face. How does it feel to lose it all, Ms. Greer? Isabel stopped. She looked directly into the camera lens, her eyes dark and dangerous. I haven't lost anything, because I never owned it to begin with. I built it. And bricks are heavy, but they can be res-tacked. She turned and continued walking, holding her son's hands. But when they finally reached their building, the doorman, a man she had tipped generously for years, didn't open the gate. He stood behind the glass, shaking his head. "Change the locks, Ms. Greer," he mouthed through the safety glass. "Receiver's orders." Isabel stood on the sidewalk, the cold seeping into her bones. She was homeless again. It was a perfect circle. 10 years ago, Dominic had thrown her out into the snow. Tonight, he had done it again from the grave of his reputation. But as she looked at her shivering sons, a fire ignited in her chest that was hotter than any rage she had ever felt. "Where are we going?" Leo asked, his voice steady but small. Isabel flagged down a passing yellow cab, pulling the last crumpled $100 bill she kept in her phone case. Her mad money. "To the archives," Isabel said, opening the cab door. "It's time you saw where we really came from." The cab dropped them off in a part of Chicago that the society pages ignored. The streetlights here flickered with a nervous yellow hum, and the pavement was cracked like a spiderweb. Isabel led the boys to a nondescript brick building that had once been a textile factory. She punched a code into a rusted keypad near the service entrance. Click! The heavy steel door groaned open. Inside, it wasn't a factory. It was a single, vast loft space with concrete floors and exposed pipes. It was cold, dusty, and filled with stacks of bankers' boxes. In the center of the room sat a single leather couch and a massive server rack that hummed with a low blue light. "This is the safe house," Isabel announced, locking the deadbolt behind them. "I bought this building under a shell company the day your father threw me out. It doesn't exist on any ledger Graves has access to." Julian immediately ran to the server rack, plugging in his tablet. "This is a hard line," he marveled. "Untraceable." Leo walked to one of the boxes and pulled out a thick file. "Mom," he said, holding up a paper. "This is the lawsuit. I just downloaded the full filing from the court database." Isabel walked over, her heels clicking on the concrete. She took the document. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She skipped the legal jargon and went straight to the evidence list. Exhibit A, sworn testimony of Dominic Kane. She read the paragraph. Asterisk, I, Dominic Kane, attest that Isabel Greer illegally accessed my private banking servers, that she used blackmail to force the sale of my debt. Asterisk. He's lying, Isabel whispered. He knows I bought it legally. Why would he do this? He has nothing to gain. Serafina destroyed him too. Maybe he isn't doing it for gain, Leo said, pointing to the bottom of the page. Look at the location stamp on the notary's seal. Isabel squinted. The seal wasn't from Chicago. It was from a county clerk in Oak Haven, Ohio. Oak Haven, Isabel murmured. That's a Rust Belt town. It's in the middle of nowhere. He's not with Serafina, Julian said, his eyes glued to the screen as code cascaded down the monitor. If he was working with them, they'd have him in the Ritz-Carlton. They'd be parading him around. But he's hiding. Or he's being held, Isabel corrected. She looked at the twins. If Dominic testifies on Monday, we lose everything. Permanent federal prison. But if he doesn't show up, their case falls apart. She grabbed a heavy wool coat from a rack of old clothes she kept in the corner. It smelled of dust and old memories. I have to find him, Isabel said, buttoning the coat over her ruined gown. I have to get to Ohio before Graves' men realize where he is. You can't go alone, Leo protested. The police are looking for you. That's why I'm not taking the highway, Isabel said, grabbing a set of keys from a hook on the wall. And that's why I need you two here. You are mission control. You track Graves. You watch the accounts. If anyone gets close to this building, you wipe the servers and run. Do you understand? The twins looked at each other, then at their mother. They nodded. They were soldiers now. Isabel walked to the freight elevator. She didn't know that while she was planning a rescue mission, the enemy was already one step ahead. As she descended to the garage to retrieve the nondescript sedan she kept for emergencies, a notification pinged on Julian's screen upstairs. System alert. Unauthorized login attempt from IP address. Local. Julian froze. The leak wasn't coming from the office. It was coming from inside the safe house. Someone else was in the building. Someone is in the building, Julian whispered, his fingers freezing over the keyboard. Isabel killed the lights. The safe house plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the faint blue glow of the server rack and the amber streetlights filtering through the grime of the high windows. She moved instinctively to the wall, grabbing a heavy iron pipe that had been left behind by the factory's previous tenants. Where? Isabel breathed, her eyes scanning the shadows of the vast loft. The signal is originating from here, Julian said, tapping the screen. It's a localized handshake. A device in this room is transmitting our location data to an external server. Isabel looked at her sons. They had been stripped of their phones. She had dished her jewelry. They had changed clothes. We're clean. I checked everything. It's not us, Leo said, walking toward the pile of coats Isabel had grabbed from the rack. He pulled out the heavy wool trench coat she had planned to wear. He ran his hands along the lining, feeling for a lump. He stopped at the collar. It's the coat. Isabel froze. That coat had been hanging in this safe house for 3 years. No one knew about this place. No one except. Leo ripped the seam of the collar open. A small, black disc, no larger than a dime, fell onto the concrete floor. It blinked with a rhythmic red light. It's a sleeper bug, Julian analyzed, his face pale in the blue light. Low frequency. It only activates when it detects movement after a long period of dormancy. Mom, this wasn't planted today. This was planted years ago. Isabel stared at the device. A cold realization washed over her. She had bought this building through a shell company managed by her former lawyer, Silas. The same lawyer she had fired and then rehired after the wedding. Silas, she hissed. He didn't just work for me. He kept a back door open. He sold the location to Graves as an insurance policy. They know we're here, Leo said, his voice tightening. Look at the transmission log. It uploaded a ping 30 seconds ago. Isabel grabbed the bug and crushed it under her heel. Plastic shattered against the concrete. Pack the drives, she commanded, throwing the coat aside. We have to leave. Now. But before they could move, Julian held up a hand. Wait. We don't have time to wait, Julian. Graves has a private security team that operates outside the law. They could be 5 minutes away. No. Mom. Look. Julian pointed at the screen. The data didn't go to Graves' headquarters in Chicago. It was routed through a bounce server. In Ohio. Isabel stopped. Ohio. Oakhaven, Ohio, Julian confirmed. The same town where Dominic's notary seal came from. The signal isn't calling in a strike team, Mom. It's pinging a specific receiver. Someone in Oakhaven is watching us. Little did Isabel know, the bug wasn't a trap set by her enemies to capture her. It was a breadcrumb trail left by someone who knew she would eventually come looking for the truth. The game wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about following the line to the other end. Don't disconnect it, Isabel said, a dangerous idea forming in her mind. What? Julian looked at her like she was insane. Mom, they are tracking us. Exactly, Isabel said, stepping back into the blue light of the monitors. If we destroy the signal, they'll know we found it. They'll send a physical team to sweep the building. But if we leave it active, we can feed it what we want them to hear. She looked at Julian. Can you hijack the signal? Can you send a false loop? Julian cracked a smile, a rare, terrifying expression that mirrored his father's intellect. I can make them think we're driving south toward Mexico. I can spoof the GPS data to show us moving at 60 miles per hour down I-55. Do it, Isabel ordered. Send the ghost car south. Buy me time to go east. Julian's fingers flew across the keyboard. Ghost protocol initiated. According to Alistair Graves' screen, Isabel Greer is currently passing the city limits headed for St. Louis. Isabel exhaled, the tension in her shoulders dropping an inch. She looked at the map on the screen, the real one. Oakhaven, Ohio was a 6-hour drive. If she left now, she would arrive just before dawn. I'm going alone, Isabel stated. It wasn't a question. No, Leo protested, stepping forward. We're a team. You need us. Isabel knelt down, placing her hands on their shoulders. They felt so small under the oversized suits, yet their eyes were so old. I need you, Leo. But I need you here. Someone has to keep the ghost car driving. Someone has to monitor the accounts. If Graves realizes I'm not in that car, he will lock down the state lines. She looked at Julian. You are the architect. You keep the digital walls up. She looked at Leo. You are the watchman. If anyone comes through that door, you execute the wipe protocol and you run to the emergency rendezvous point. Do not try to be a hero. Do you understand? Leo clenched his jaw, fighting back tears of frustration, but he nodded. We'll hold the fort. Isabel stood up. She walked to a rusted locker in the corner of the room. Inside was a small safe. She spun the dial, her birthday, and opened it. Inside sat a stack of cash and a single set of car keys. The sedan is in the basement, Isabel said, tucking the cash into her pocket. It's a 2010 Honda. Unregistered. No GPS. No OnStar. She turned back to her sons. She wanted to hug them, to promise them that everything would be fine, but she wouldn't lie to them. I'm going to get your father, she said simply. And when we come back, we aren't just going to win the lawsuit. We're going to burn Graves' company to the ground. Isabel walked to the freight elevator. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she would stay. The heavy metal gate rattled shut, separating the queen from her princes. As the elevator descended into the darkness of the garage, Isabel Greer ceased to exist. In her place sat a woman with no name, no money, and a singular, burning mission. The Honda smelled of stale cigarettes and pine air freshener. It was a far cry from the leather and cedar of the Rolls-Royce, but when the engine turned over with a rough cough, it sounded like freedom. Isabel pulled out of the underground garage into the alleyway. It was raining now, a cold, sleeting rain that blurred the city lights into streaks of neon. She kept her headlights off until she hit the main road, blending into the late-night traffic of delivery trucks and shift workers. She checked the rearview mirror. Nothing but rain. She merged onto the eastbound highway, keeping her speed strictly at the limit. She couldn't afford a ticket. She couldn't afford a flat tire. Every mile put distance between her and the ruins of her empire. As the skyline of Chicago faded in the rearview mirror, the Greer Cane Tower standing tall and dark like a tombstone against the clouds, Isabel allowed herself a moment of fear. She was driving into a trap. Dominic had signed that affidavit. He had betrayed her. Why was she going to save him? Because he's the father, a voice whispered in her head. And because you know what it's like to be forced into a corner. She reached for the radio to drown out her thoughts, but her hand froze. In the side mirror, two headlights had appeared. They were high off the ground. Xenon blue. The distinct, aggressive stance of a luxury SUV. Isabel changed lanes. The SUV changed lanes. Isabel slowed down. The SUV slowed down. They weren't following the ghost signal. They weren't tracking the bug. They're tracking the car, Isabel whispered, her blood running cold. She realized with a jolt that Silas hadn't just bugged the code. He had logged every asset in the safe house, including the emergency vehicle. She slammed her foot on the accelerator. The Honda whined in protest, shaking as it pushed past 80 miles per hour. The SUV behind her surged forward, a black behemoth eating up the distance between them. It was a Cadillac Escalade. Tinted windows, no license plate. Isabel gripped the wheel. She was alone on a dark stretch of highway, exhausted and outgunned. But as the SUV rammed her rear bumper, sending a jolt of whiplash through her spine, Isabel didn't panic. She smiled. You want to play? She hissed, eyeing the exit ramp coming up fast on the right. Let's see if your tank can handle the mud. She yanked the wheel hard to the right at the last second, the tires screeching as she drifted onto the exit ramp. The SUV swerved to follow, its heavy frame tilting dangerously. Isabel was leading them off the map, into the dark industrial wasteland of Gary, Indiana. Little did the men in the SUV know, they weren't chasing a socialite. They were chasing a mother who had just lost her cubs, and she wasn't looking for an escape. She was looking for a weapon. The Cadillac Escalade was heavy, built for intimidation and comfort, not for the tight, debris-strewn corners of an abandoned industrial park. Isabel knew this. She knew that power without agility was just a target. She slammed the Honda into a lower gear, the engine screaming as she drifted around a rusting water tower. The SUV roared behind her, its high beams illuminating the rain like lasers. Come on, Isabel whispered, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Too heavy. You're too heavy. She saw the gap ahead, a narrow service tunnel beneath the old steel mill. It was designed for forklifts, not luxury tanks. She lined up the Honda, clipped the side mirror on a concrete pillar, and shot into the darkness. Sparks flew as metal ground against stone. Behind her, the squeal of brakes was followed by a sickening crunch of metal on concrete. The SUV was too wide. It wedged itself into the tunnel entrance, its headlights beaming uselessly into the void. Isabel didn't stop to check the damage. She punched the accelerator, emerging from the other side of the mill and disappearing into the labyrinth of Gary, Indiana. She drove for 4 hours without stopping, taking back roads that twisted through the cornfields of Indiana and into the desolate heart of Ohio. The rain stopped, replaced by a thick, gray fog that clung to the asphalt. By the time she reached the city limits of Oak Haven, the sun was beginning to bleed a bruised purple light over the horizon. Oak Haven wasn't a city. It was a graveyard of industry. Empty factories stood like skeletons against the sky. Main Street was a row of boarded-up windows and for-lease signs. It was the kind of place people came to disappear. Isabel consulted the address Leo had pulled from the notary seal. For 21, Mill Street. It was a tenement building with peeling yellow paint and a front porch that sagged in the middle. Isabel parked the Honda 2 blocks away, hidden behind a dumpster. She walked the rest of the distance, her wool coat pulled tight against the damp morning chill. She wasn't the CEO of Greer Cane Dynamics here. She was just another woman walking through the wreckage. She reached the apartment door, Unit 2B. The lock was cheap, a simple deadbolt that looked like it could be opened with a credit card. But Isabel didn't need to pick it. The door was already ajar. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She pushed the door open with the toe of her boot. "Dominic," she called out, her voice barely a whisper. Silence. She stepped inside. The apartment was a single room, smaller than her walk-in closet in Chicago. A stained mattress lay on the floor. A card table sat in the corner with a single chair. But it was the chaos that caught her eye. The mattress was overturned. The lamp was shattered. A hole had been punched in the drywall, the plaster dust still settling on the floor. Isabel moved to the center of the room, turning in a slow circle. This wasn't a home. It was a cell. And whoever had been living here hadn't left. They had been taken. The air in the apartment smelled of stale coffee and violence. Isabel crouched down, her eyes scanning the floor for clues. She needed to know if Dominic had fought back. She needed to know if he was the monster Serafina claimed he was, or if he was the victim Isabel suspected. She saw a glint of metal under the overturned radiator. Isabel reached out and pulled the object free. It wasn't a weapon. It was a heavy brass coin, worn smooth by the friction of a thumb rubbing against it incessantly. She held it up to the weak light filtering through the dirty window. "To thine own self be true. Unity, service, recovery. 6 months." Isabel stared at the coin. Dominic Kane, the man who used to drink $1,000 scotch like water, the man who mocked weakness, had been sober for 6 months. He had been fighting a battle no one knew about. "He didn't sell me out," Isabel whispered to the empty room. "He was getting better." A realization struck her. If Dominic was sober, Serafina couldn't bribe him with money. He had learned to live without it. She couldn't bribe him with alcohol. She had to use force. The affidavit wasn't a betrayal. It was a ransom note. Suddenly, a vibration buzzed against her thigh. It wasn't her phone. She had smashed that in Chicago. It was a burner phone she had found taped under the card table. It had been ringing silently. Isabel picked it up. The screen was cracked. The caller ID said unknown. She swiped answer but didn't speak. She held the phone to her ear, listening to the static. "I told you not to come," a voice rasped. It was rough, broken, but unmistakably Dominic. Isabel's grip on the phone tightened. "Where are you?" "Leave, Isabel," Dominic said. He sounded exhausted. "They know you're in town. Graves has a tracking team sweeping the motels. If they find you, they'll kill you." "I'm not leaving without you," Isabel said, her voice steady. "I found the coin, Dominic. I know you're clean. I know you didn't sign that paper willingly." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a sigh that sounded like a man letting go of a cliff edge. "They have a gun to my head, Izzy. Not literally, but they have something worse." "I don't care what they have." Isabel cut him off. "I have the truth. Tell me where you are." "I'm at work," Dominic laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Can you believe that? I have a job. Or I did, until 5 minutes ago when I saw the black SUV pull into the lot." "Which lot?" Isabel demanded, grabbing the car keys. "The diner on Route 9. The Rusty Spoon. But don't come. There are 2 of them. They're sitting in a booth right now, drinking coffee, waiting for me to clock out so they can grab me quietly." "Stay in the kitchen," Isabel ordered, already moving toward the door. "Do not go out the back. Do not try to be a hero. Just wash the dishes, Dominic. I'm coming to pay the bill." The Rusty Spoon Diner sat on a lonely stretch of highway surrounded by dead cornfields. It was a chrome and neon relic from the 50s, its windows fogged with grease and condensation. Isabel parked the Honda around the back, near the overflowing dumpsters. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have Henderson. She had a tire iron she had grabbed from the trunk and the element of surprise. She peered through the back screen door into the kitchen. The air was thick with the smell of frying bacon and despair. And there he was, Dominic Kane. He was standing at a deep stainless steel sink, his hands submerged in gray, soapy water. He wore a stained white apron over a faded flannel shirt. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was long and tied back messily. He had aged 10 years in the last one. There were deep lines etched around his eyes, and a heaviness in his shoulders that spoke of a man carrying the world. He wasn't the arrogant billionaire who had sneered at her. He was just a man trying to scrub a plate clean. Isabel tapped on the glass. Dominic's head snapped up. His eyes widened when he saw her. He shook his head frantically, mouthing the word go. Isabel ignored him. She opened the screen door and stepped into the kitchen. The heat hit her instantly. A line cook flipping burgers didn't even look up, too high or too tired to care. Nice apron, Isabel said, stopping beside him. Dominic looked at her, then down at his soapy hands. It pays minimum wage, he said quietly. But it's honest. He looked toward the swinging double doors that led to the dining area. They're out there, Izzy. Booth 4. Graves Personal Cleaners. I know, Isabel said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the brass sobriety coin she had found. She placed it on the metal counter next to the dirty dishes. You dropped this. Dominic stared at the coin. His throat bobbed. He reached out with a wet, trembling hand and picked it up, clutching it like a lifeline. I wanted to be someone they could respect, he whispered. The twins. I wanted to fix it. Then finish the shift, Isabel said. We're leaving. We can't, Dominic hissed. The back door is alarmed. If we open it, the chime sounds in the dining room. They'll be on us before we get to the car. Isabel looked around the kitchen. She saw the fire suppression system overhead. She saw the grill flaring with grease. She smiled, a dangerous, familiar smile that Dominic hadn't seen in a decade. Who said we were going to sneak out? Isabel asked. She grabbed a bottle of high-proof cooking sherry from the shelf. We're going to create a distraction. She splashed the sherry onto the flat-top grill. The flames roared up, licking the ceiling. The heat sensors tripped instantly. Whoosh. The Ansel system dumped gallons of white chemical foam onto the grill. The fire alarm shrieked, a deafening, ear-splitting wail. In the dining room, chaos erupted. Customers screamed. Chairs scraped against the floor. Move, Isabel shouted, grabbing Dominic's arm. They bolted for the back door just as the swinging doors from the dining room flew open. Two men in suits burst into the kitchen, guns drawn, but they were blinded by the wall of white foam and the flashing strobe lights of the alarm. Secure the target, one of them yelled, firing a shot blindly into the ceiling. Isabel and Dominic burst out into the cool morning air. They scrambled into the Honda. Dominic fumbled with the seatbelt, his hands shaking. Isabel slammed the car into reverse, spinning the wheel as the back door of the diner banged open again. The hitmen stumbled out, raising their weapons. Isabel floored it. The Honda kicked up a spray of gravel and mud, fishtailing onto the highway just as the rear windshield shattered into 1,000 diamonds of safety glass. Drive, Dominic screamed. I am driving, Isabel shouted back, pushing the speedometer past 90. They were alive. But as Isabel looked at Dominic in the passenger seat, covered in soap suds, clutching a sobriety coin, and bleeding from a cut on his cheek, she knew the hardest part wasn't escaping. It was going to be forgiving the man sitting next to her enough to let him save her life. The Honda was not built for sustained speed, but fear is a potent fuel. Isabel drove until the diner was a speck in the rearview mirror. Then she drove further, weaving through a labyrinth of back roads until the cornfields gave way to the dense tree line of the Pennsylvania border. The shattered rear window let in a constant, howling draft that chilled the cabin, but the cold inside the car had nothing to do with the wind. Dominic sat in the passenger seat, staring at his hands. They were still red and raw from the dishwater, shaking with the adrenaline crash. He hadn't spoken since they hit the highway. He looked like a man who had been woken from a nightmare only to find himself in a war zone. They're gone, Isabel said, her eyes flicking to the mirrors every 3 seconds. We lost them near the interchange. Dominic didn't look up. They aren't gone, is he? Graves doesn't stop. He's a machine. He'll have a drone grid up by noon. He rubbed his face, smearing a streak of soot across his cheek. Pull over. Let me out. Isabel frowned, keeping her foot on the gas. Don't be stupid. You're the key witness. If I leave you, they grab you. If they grab you, I lose my company and my children. If you take me back, you lose anyway. Dominic shouted, the sudden volume making Isabel flinch. He turned to her, his eyes wild and desperate. Look at me. I'm a dishwasher. I'm a recovering alcoholic living in a rat-infested studio. You think a jury is going to believe me over Alistair Graves? I'm damaged goods, Isabel. I'm the villain of your story. Bringing me back just hands them the hammer to nail your coffin shut. Isabel didn't slow down. She saw a faded sign for the Bluebird motor in ahead. You aren't the villain anymore, Dominic, she said quietly. You're just the evidence. She pulled into the motel parking lot, tucking the car behind a rusted dumpster to hide the license plate. She killed the engine. The silence that filled the car was heavy, filled with 10 years of unsaid words. We rest here for 3 hours, Isabel commanded, opening her door. We need to tape up the window and get you a change of clothes. You can't testify looking like a line cook. Dominic didn't move. He stared at the dashboard. Why did you come for me? He whispered. After everything I did. Why didn't you just let me rot? Isabel paused. She looked at the man who had once been her world, then her tormentor, and now, strangely, her responsibility. Because the enemy of my enemy is my asset, she lied. But as she walked toward the reception office, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. She hadn't come for an asset. She had come because she knew what it was like to be thrown away, and she refused to be the one doing the throwing. The motel room smelled of lemon polish and old cigarettes. Isabel sat on the edge of the bed, watching Dominic pace. He had washed the soot off his face and changed into a pair of stiff jeans and a sweatshirt Isabel had bought from a nearby thrift store. He looked cleaner, but he still moved with the skittish energy of a trapped animal. I can't do it, Dominic said, stopping by the window to peek through the curtains. I can't face them, Izzy. The twins. Leo and Julian. They hate me. They should hate me. They don't hate you, Isabel said, opening a bottle of water. They are indifferent to you. Hate requires energy. Indifference is just absence. That's worse. Dominic laughed bitterly. He pulled the sobriety coin from his pocket, flipping it over his knuckles. I tried, you know. When I got sober 6 months ago, I wanted to call. I wanted to send money. But I had nothing. Serafina took the last of my liquidity before the wedding. I was sleeping in a shelter until... He trailed off, a frown creasing his forehead. Until what? Isabel asked, though she already knew the answer. Until this angel investor appeared, Dominic said, a strange softness entering his voice. Some anonymous donor. The Phoenix Trust. They paid for my rehab. They paid the deposit on the apartment. They even set up a small stipend so I could focus on recovery without starving. He looked at Isabel, his eyes shining with a fragile hope. That's why I can't go back. If I testify, I expose myself. If I get famous again, the donor might pull the funding. It's the only good thing I have left. Isabel set the water bottle down. The plastic clicked against the nightstand. She looked at Dominic, at the coin in his hand, at the fear in his eyes. She realized then that he truly didn't know. He thought the universe had shown him mercy. He didn't realize the mercy had a name. Dominic, Isabel said softly. The Phoenix Trust isn't an angel investor. What do you mean? Of course it is. My sponsor said. Phoenix, Isabel interrupted. Who do you know that rose from the ashes? Dominic froze. The coin stopped moving in his fingers. He looked at her, really looked at her, processing the expensive coat, the determination, the name of her gala. No, he whispered. No. You hate me. I did, Isabel admitted. For a long time. But hate is expensive, Dominic. It costs too much energy. And when I saw you at the wedding, broken and humiliated, I realized that destroying you wouldn't fix me. She stood up and walked toward him. I set up the trust. I paid for the rehab. I paid for the apartment. Dominic backed away until he hit the wall. He looked like he had been slapped. Why? Why would you save me? Because you are the father of my children, Isabel said, her voice fierce. And I refuse to let my son's father die in a gutter. I didn't do it for you. I did it so that one day, when they asked what happened to you, I could tell them you tried. Dominic slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. He put his head in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. It wasn't the loud, performative sobbing of a man seeking pity. It was the silent, racking grief of a man realizing he had been forgiven by the very person he had tried to destroy. Isabel knelt beside him. She didn't hug him. She simply sat there, a silent sentinel in the cheap motel room. "You don't owe me the money back," Isabel said. "But you do owe me a testimony. You owe me the truth." Dominic looked up. His eyes were red, but the fear was gone. In its place was something harder. Resolve. "I'll do it," he rasped. "I'll testify. I'll burn them down, Izzy. I swear." The drive back to Chicago was different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was focused. Dominic sat in the passenger seat, not staring at his hands, but reading the legal files Isabel had brought. He was highlighting sections, muttering to himself, his old CEO brain waking up from its slumber. "Graves made a mistake here," Dominic murmured, pointing to a clause in the filing. "He filed for an emergency injunction based on imminent flight risk. But if I voluntarily surrender, the risk is nullified. We can force a hearing within 24 hours. We have to get into the city first," Isabel said, gripping the wheel. "Check the news." Dominic turned on the car radio. He tuned it to a Chicago news station. "Breaking news this hour. The manhunt continues for disgraced CO Isabel Greer, who fled custody last night after being served with federal fraud charges." Isabel's stomach tightened. "Fled custody? I was never in custody." "Authorities are warning that Greer is considered armed and dangerous," the reporter continued. "She is believed to have kidnapped a key witness, her ex-husband Dominic Kane, in a desperate attempt to silence him." "Kidnapped?" Dominic laughed darkly. "That's Serafina's spin. She's trying to make sure the police shoot first and ask questions later." "They've weaponized the narrative," Isabel said, seeing a sign for the Illinois state line ahead. "And they've weaponized the border. Look, ahead." The highway narrowed. Flashing blue and red lights painted the twilight sky. A police roadblock was set up across all 4 lanes. Troopers were checking every car. "We can't get through," Dominic said, tension returning to his shoulders. "If they run your ID, we're done." Isabel slowed the car, her mind racing. She looked at the dashboard clock. It was 6 p.m. The sun was setting. "We don't need to get through," Isabel said, pulling the car onto the shoulder a mile before the checkpoint. "We need to get around." She reached into the glove box and pulled out the burner phone. She dialed a number she had memorized, a number that didn't go to a phone, but to a secure server in a safe house. "Julian," Isabel said when the line clicked open. "I'm at the chaotic gate. I need a path." "I see you." Julian's voice came through, calm and digitized. "I've hacked the Department of Transportation's grid. There is a service road 3 miles back, but it's gated. It leads to the old rail yards. Can you open it?" "I can do better," Julian said. "I can turn every traffic light in Gary, Indiana green for the westbound lanes. It will create a gridlock surge that will force the police to divert resources to traffic control. You'll have a 3-minute window where the checkpoint is understaffed." "Do it," Isabel ordered. She looked at Dominic. "Put your seatbelt on. We're going to crash the party." Isabel threw the car into a U-turn, heading back toward the chaos Julian was about to unleash. Little did she know, the roadblock wasn't just police. Sitting in an unmarked van behind the troopers was Alistair Graves, watching a live feed of the highway, waiting for a Honda with a broken rear window to make a mistake. The highway was a river of red taillights. Julian's hack had worked with terrifying efficiency. By turning every traffic signal in the surrounding 3 counties green for westbound traffic, he had created a compression wave of vehicles that flooded the checkpoint. The police blockade, originally designed to filter cars one by one, was now drowning in a tsunami of confused commuters, angry truckers, and honking horns. "Now," Isabel said, her eyes fixed on the chaos ahead. She steered the Honda off the main asphalt and onto the gravel service road Julian had identified. It was hidden behind a line of dense scrub brush, running parallel to the highway but separated by a chain-link fence. The car bounced violently over the uneven ground, the suspension groaning in protest. "They'll see us," Dominic warned, gripping the dashboard handle. "The helicopter." "Look up," Isabel said, pointing through the cracked windshield. Above them, the police helicopter banked sharply away from the highway. its spotlight sweeping toward a cluster of semi-trucks that had jackknifed it in the confusion 2 miles back. Julian hadn't just cleared the road. He had created a diversion loud enough to draw every eye in the county. Isabel killed the headlights, driving by the faint ambient glow of the city skyline ahead. They rolled past the blockade in the dark, separated by only 50 yards of fence. She could see the troopers shouting, waving their batons at the gridlocked cars, completely unaware that their target was ghosting past them in the shadows. "You raised them to be dangerous," Dominic murmured, watching the chaos recede in the side mirror. There was a mix of awe and fear in his voice. "I thought you would raise them to be safe." "Safety is a myth, Dominic," Isabel said, merging back onto the empty city streets once they cleared the perimeter. "I raised them to control the environment, so the environment couldn't control them." They navigated the back alleys of Chicago, avoiding the cameras and the patrols. The city felt different tonight. It wasn't the welcoming kingdom Isabel had ruled yesterday. It was a fortress occupied by an enemy army. Every siren made her pulse spike. Every black SUV looked like a hearse. They reached the industrial district. Isabel pulled the battered Honda into the underground loading dock of the safe house. The heavy steel door rolled down behind them, shutting out the world. Silence returned. Isabel turned off the engine. She looked at Dominic. He was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he unbuckled his seatbelt. He wasn't afraid of the police anymore. He was afraid of what was waiting upstairs. "Ready?" Isabel asked. Dominic took a breath, clutching the sobriety coin in his pocket. "No." "Good," Isabel said, opening her door. "Let's go." The freight elevator groaned as it ascended, carrying them up to the loft. Dominic stood in the corner of the metal cage, adjusting his cheap thrift store sweatshirt, trying to smooth his messy hair. He looked like a man preparing for an execution. The doors rattled open. The loft was exactly as Isabel had left it, bathed in the cool blue light of the server racks. But now, the silence was thick with tension. Standing in the center of the room, behind a makeshift desk of stacked crates, were Leo and Julian. They were wearing their bespoke suits, ties loosened, sleeves rolled up. They looked exhausted but alert. When the elevator doors opened, they didn't run to their mother. They didn't cry. They stood their ground, their dark eyes locking onto the man standing beside her. Isabel stepped out. "Status?" she asked, keeping her voice professional to steady the room. "Perimeter secure," Leo said, his voice flat. "Graves' team is focused on the decoy signal in St. Louis. We have about 4 hours before they realize it's a loop." Isabel nodded. She turned to Dominic and gestured for him to step forward. Dominic took a hesitant step into the light. He looked at his sons, identical mirrors of his own face, but sharpened by Isabel's steel. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. "Hello, boys," he choked out, his voice cracking. Julian didn't blink. He looked Dominic up and down, assessing him like a piece of code that needed debugging. "You look tired," Julian observed. "Not cruel, just factual." "I am," Dominic admitted. I wanted to say." "Don't," Leo interrupted. He stepped around the desk, holding a thick file folder. He walked up to Dominic, stopping just outside of hugging range. He didn't offer a hand. He offered the file. "This is the situation report," Leo said. "We've analyzed the affidavit you signed. The syntax suggests coercion. We assume you didn't read the fine print on page 12 regarding the transfer of liability." Dominic stared at the file, then at his son. "Leo, I'm Julian." The boy corrected him, though he didn't look offended. "Leo is the one holding the file. We suggest you memorize the timeline of events on page 4. If we are going to extract you from this legal bind, your testimony needs to be precise." Dominic took the folder. His hands were shaking. He had expected anger. He had expected screaming. He had prepared himself for hatred. But this cold, efficient pragmatism was far worse. It was the reaction of children who had learned that emotions were a liability. They weren't looking at him as a father. They were looking at him as a compromised asset that needed to be repaired. "I'm sorry," Dominic whispered, tears spilling over. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there." "Apologies are inefficient," Leo said, turning back to the screens. "Action is the only metric that matters. Read the file, Mr. Kane. We have work to do." Isabel watched from the shadows. Her heart broke for Dominic, but she didn't intervene. She knew that trust wasn't a gift she could force them to give. It was a wage he had to earn. An hour later, the dynamic in the safe house had shifted from emotional to tactical. Isabel stood over the map of the city spread out on the card table. Dominic sat on a crate, reading the files Leo had given him. The twins were at the computers, their fingers flying across the keyboards. "We have a problem," Dominic said, pointing to a document. "Graves has scheduled the emergency shareholder vote for tomorrow morning. He's going to use his power as receiver to vote your shares by proxy. He'll approve the acquisition of Greer Cane by his own shell company, essentially selling your empire to himself for pennies on the dollar. He can't do that without a quorum," Isabel argued. "The board won't show up." "The board is scared," Dominic countered, his old CEO instincts sharpening his voice. "Graves has likely threatened them with the same RICO charges he used on you. They'll show up. They'll vote. And by noon tomorrow, you won't just be broke, you'll be erased." Isabel slammed her hand on the table. "We can't stop the vote. We can't get into the building. The security grid is biometric." "Actually," Julian said, spinning his chair around, "we don't need to stop the vote. We need him to think he's already won." He pulled up a new window on the main screen. It showed a stream of emails, Isabel's private emails. "You found the leak?" Isabel asked. "I am the leak," Julian corrected, a sly smile touching his lips. "Mom, the bug in the code wasn't the only way Graves was getting info. I realized days ago that he had a backdoor into your email server. I didn't patch it." "Why not?" "Because if I patched it, he would know we knew," Julian explained. "Instead, for the last 48 hours, Leo and I have been feeding him a meticulously crafted narrative. We've been sending draft emails to your lawyers discussing your imminent surrender. We created fake flight itineraries to Switzerland. We even planted a digital trail suggesting you hid millions in offshore accounts that he can access only if he finalizes the acquisition tomorrow." Isabel stared at her son. "You're baiting him." "We're making him greedy," Leo added. "He thinks you're fleeing. He thinks the company is loaded with hidden cash. He's going to rush that vote tomorrow because he wants to get his hands on the loot before you leave the country. So he's walking into a trap," Dominic realized, looking at his sons with a new expression, respect. "Exactly," Julian said. "He thinks he's walking into a coronation. He doesn't know he's walking into an ambush. But for the ambush to work," Julian looked at Dominic. "We need a ghost to walk through the wall," Julian finished. "We need someone who knows the physical security of the building better than the digital one. Someone who built the tower." Dominic stood up. He buttoned the cheap sweatshirt, but he stood with the posture of a man in a three-piece suit. "I designed the ventilation grid," Dominic said. "There's a maintenance access on the 40th floor that bypasses the biometric scanners. If I can get in, I can manually override the server room lock." "It's suicide," Isabel said. "If Graves catches you." "He won't," Dominic said, looking at his sons. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not fighting for myself." The transformation of Dominic Kane began in the silence of the safe house bathroom. There were no stylists, no Italian tailors, no glass of scotch waiting on a silver tray. There was only a cracked mirror, a disposable razor, and a bar of harsh yellow soap. Isabel stood in the doorway, watching him. Dominic stared at his reflection, the beard that hid his jawline, the long hair that softened his eyes, the grime of the road that coated his skin like shame. He looked like the man he had become, broken, hiding, and apologetic. But that man couldn't walk into the Greer Cane Tower tomorrow. That man would be eaten alive. "Cut it," Isabel said, her voice cutting through the hum of the ventilation. "All of it. If you want them to believe you're a threat, you have to look like the predator they remember." Dominic picked up the scissors. He didn't hesitate. Snip by snip, the long, messy hair fell into the sink. Then came the razor. He scraped away the beard, revealing the sharp, angular jaw that the twins had inherited. With every stroke, the softness vanished. The eyes that stared back weren't the eyes of a dishwasher. They were the cold, calculating eyes of a titan. When he stepped out of the bathroom 30 minutes later, the loft went quiet. Isabel had pulled a suit from the archives. One of his old charcoal gray bespoke suits that she had kept in storage, perhaps as a trophy, perhaps as a memory. It fit him differently now. He was thinner, leaner, stripped of the bloat of alcohol and arrogance. The suit didn't just hang on him, it armored him. Leo and Julian looked up from their monitors. For a second, just a second, they looked like little boys seeing a superhero. Then the mask slammed back down. "The tie is crooked," Leo said, standing up. He walked over to his father. Dominic froze, afraid to move, afraid to break the moment. Leo reached up, his small hands deft and precise, and fixed the Windsor knot. He tightened it with a sharp tug, exactly the way Isabel would have. "Better," Leo muttered, stepping back. "Now you look like someone who can override a biometric lock." "Thank you," Dominic whispered. "Don't thank me," Leo said, turning back to his screen. "Just don't get caught. If you do, we deny everything." It was a cold instruction, but Dominic smiled. It was the first time in 10 years his son had touched him without flinching. He was ready. While Dominic was armoring himself, Isabel was sharpening her own weapons. She sat at the card table, the burner phone in her hand. Julian had successfully planted the digital evidence of her flight. But Isabel knew that Serafina needed more than data to be reckless. She needed an emotional push. She needed to feel like she had won. Isabel dialed a number. It rang once. "Housekeeping." A woman's voice answered, trembling slightly. "Marta," Isabel said softly. "It's me." There was a gasp on the other end. "Ms. Greer? Oh God. They said you were a fugitive. They have agents everywhere." "I know, Marta. Listen to me. I need you to do one thing. Are you still cleaning the executive suite?" "Yes, ma'am." "That woman, Mrs. Graves, she moved into your office this morning. She's throwing out your books. She's putting her feet on your desk." Isabel felt a spike of rage, but she pushed it down. "Let her." "Marta, in the storage closet on the 40th floor, on the top shelf, there is a vase. Inside is a silk white orchid. Do you know the one? The one you keep for special occasions?" "Yes. I need you to place it on the desk, right in the center. Do it when she goes to lunch." "Is there a note?" "No note," Isabel said. "Just the flower. She'll know what it means." 2 hours later, across the city, Serafina Sterling walked back into the office she had stolen. She was laughing on the phone with a jeweler, ordering a new setting for a diamond she planned to buy with the company's liquidation funds. She pushed open the heavy oak doors, feeling the thrill of ownership. Then she stopped. Sitting in the exact center of the mahogany desk, stark white against the dark wood, was the orchid. Serafina dropped her phone. She knew that flower. Isabel used to send white orchids to her enemies after she acquired their companies. It was her signature, a symbol of death and rebirth. It meant, "I am already here." "Security," Serafina screamed, backing away from the desk as if the flower were a bomb. "Security, sweep the room. She's been here. She's mocking me." Little did Serafina know, Isabel wasn't in the building. But the fear was. And a fearful enemy makes mistakes. Serafina grabbed her phone, her hands shaking. "Call the board," she hissed to Alistair Graves. "Move the vote up. 8 a.m. sharp. I want this company sold before she can pull another stunt." In the safe house, Julian watched the calendar update on the hacked server. "The vote is moved to 8 a.m., Julian announced. "They're panicking." Isabel smiled. The trap was set. The night before the battle is always the longest. The twins had finally fallen asleep on the leather couch, curled up together under a wool blanket, looking impossibly young for the weight they carried. The hum of the servers provided a steady, electric lullaby. Isabel stood by the high industrial window, watching the rain streak the glass. The city lights were blurred and distant, a world she used to own, a world she might never see again if tomorrow failed. "You raised them well," a voice said from the darkness. Dominic stepped up beside her. He had taken off the suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattoos on his forearms, scars from his lost years. He didn't look at her, he looked at the boys. "I raised them to survive," Isabel said. "I didn't have a choice. The world is unkind to fatherless sons." It was a jab, but Dominic didn't flinch. He took it. "I know. I saw it in Julian's eyes today. He calculates everything. He doesn't trust anything that can't be quantified. That's my fault. I broke the world for them, and they learned to fix it with math." "They aren't broken, Dominic," Isabel said, turning to face him. "They are armored. Like me." "And you?" Dominic asked, finally meeting her gaze. "Are you armored, Izzy? Or are you just tired of fighting?" Isabel looked at him. For the first time in a decade, she didn't see the enemy. She saw a man who was just as tired as she was. A man who had lost everything and was trying to claw his way back to something real. "I am exhausted," Isabel admitted, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. I am tired of being the queen. I am tired of always having to be the smartest person in the room, because if I slip for 1 second, the wolves will eat us. Then let me be the distraction, Dominic said. His voice was steady, void of the ego that used to plague him. Tomorrow, when I go into that server room, I'm not doing it to save the company. I don't care about the money anymore. I'm doing it to buy you a future where you don't have to look over your shoulder. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass sobriety coin. He placed it on the windowsill between them. If I don't make it out, Dominic whispered, give this to Leo. Tell him it was the hardest thing I ever earned. Isabel looked at the coin, then at Dominic. The silence stretched between them, heavy and profound. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was an understanding. They were no longer at war with each other. They were soldiers in the same trench. You keep it, Isabel said, pushing the coin back to him. You give it to him yourself. When we win. She turned and walked back to her makeshift cot, leaving Dominic standing by the window. He picked up the coin, his grip tightening until his knuckles turned white. He knew something Isabel didn't. He knew the security protocols of the Greer Cane Tower. He knew that to override the manual lock, someone had to be inside the cage when the system reset. He knew that tomorrow, winning might mean he wouldn't be coming home. The morning sun hit the grimy windows of the safe house, casting long, dusty beams across the concrete floor. It was 6 a.m. The vote was in 2 hours. Julian was typing so fast his fingers were a blur, but the code on the screen wasn't turning green. It was flashing a stubborn, rhythmic red. He changed the protocol, Julian said, his voice tight with panic. Graves didn't just lock the doors. He initiated a dead man's switch on the server. If the biometric scanner doesn't register a pulse from an authorized user by 7:59 a.m., the system wipes itself. The evidence, the accounts, the ghost trail, everything disappears. Isabel stared at the screen. Can you bypass it? Not remotely, Leo answered, looking up from his tablet. It's a hardware gap. We need to physically insert the override drive into the mainframe to stop the wipe. If we don't, when you walk into that meeting, you won't have a trap to spring. You'll just be surrendering. The silence in the room was heavy. The Greer Cane Tower was a fortress. The lobby was swarming with private security. The elevators were locked down. I'll go, Dominic said. He picked up the small silver flash drive from the desk. He adjusted his cuffs, the charcoal suit fitting him like a second skin. Dominic, you can't, Isabel said, grabbing his arm. The lobby has facial recognition. You'll be flagged before you reach the turnstiles. I'm not going through the lobby, Dominic said, a faint, nostalgic smile touching his lips. When I built that tower 10 years ago, the City Zoning Commission required a secondary seismic ventilation shaft for earthquake stability. It runs from the subbasement directly to the server core on the 40th floor. That shaft isn't on the blueprints, Julian said, checking the schematics. Exactly, Dominic replied. I kept it off the digital records so I could have a private entrance for discreet meetings. Graves doesn't know it exists. His security grid doesn't cover it. He looked at Isabel. I can get the drive in. But once I insert it, the system will reboot. The alarms will sound. I'll be trapped. We'll extract you, Leo promised. Once the system reboots, we regain control of the elevators. We can bring a car down to the loading dock. Dominic nodded, though his eyes held a shadow that suggested he knew the odds were far worse than Leo calculated. He turned to Isabel. If I don't make it to the dock, he said softly, don't wait for me. You take the win. You take the company back. Dominic. He didn't let her finish. He turned and walked to the freight elevator. As the metal gate rattled shut between them, Isabel felt a sudden, sharp pang of fear. She wasn't watching an ex-husband leave. She was watching a soldier walk into a minefield. The seismic shaft was dark, smelling of stagnant air and 10 years of dust. Dominic climbed the maintenance ladder, his breath echoing in the narrow metal tube. 40 floors. It was a climb that would have exhausted a younger man, but Dominic climbed with the desperate energy of someone trying to outrun his past. Floor 20. His muscles burned. The sweat soaked through his expensive shirt. Floor 30. His hands were slick. He slipped once, catching himself on a rusted rung, the metallic clang echoing dangerously loud in the silence. He reached the 40th floor. A small service hatch was set into the concrete wall. Dominic pulled a small pry bar from his jacket pocket, a tool from the safe house, and jammed it into the seam. He pushed. The metal groaned, then popped open. He dragged himself out of the shaft and onto the polished linoleum of the server room anteroom. He was inside. Dominic stood up, dusting off his suit. He checked his watch. 7:15 a.m. He had 45 minutes before the wipe. He moved silently toward the glass wall of the server core. Inside, the massive banks of blinking lights held the soul of the company he had built. He swiped a key card he had kept in his wallet for a decade, an old master admin card. Beep. Red. Access denied. The electronic voice chirped. Graves had wiped the old codes. Julian. Dominic whispered into the tiny earpiece he was wearing. I'm at the door. Key card is dead. I see you on the internal camera. Julian's voice crackled in his ear. I'm looping the video feed so security sees an empty hallway. Give me 10 seconds to brute force the door lock. Dominic waited, pressing his back against the wall. He heard the faint ding of the main elevator down the hall. Someone was coming. Julian, hurry. Got it, Julian said. Click. The lock disengaged. Dominic slipped inside the cool, humming room and locked the glass door behind him. He found the main terminal. He pulled the silver flash drive from his pocket and jammed it into the port. On the screen, a progress bar appeared. Override initiated. 10%. 20%. It was agonizingly slow. Outside the glass wall, the elevator doors opened. 2 guards in tactical gear stepped out. They weren't patrolling, they were sweeping. Graves had sent them to physically check the server room before the vote. Dominic ducked behind a rack of servers. He watched through the mesh of wires as the guards approached the glass door. They tried their badges. The light turned green, but the door didn't open. Dominic had thrown the manual deadbolt from the inside. One of the guards shone a flashlight through the glass. The beam swept over the servers, inching closer to where Dominic was crouching. Upload, 60%. Something's wrong with the lock, the guard grunted. Get the RAM. Dominic looked at the screen. If they broken now, they would pull the drive before the patch was finished. The wipe would happen. Isabel would lose. He had to make a choice. He could stay hidden and pray they didn't see him, or he could ensure the upload finished by giving them something else to look at. Dominic stood up. He walked into the center of the aisle, directly into the flashlight beam. He straightened his tie. Gentlemen, Dominic said, his voice muffled by the glass but clear enough to be heard. Do you have an appointment? The guards froze. Then, chaos. Intruder in the core. Breach. Breach. One guard slammed the butt of his rifle against the glass. It spiderwebbed, but held. The other began keying in an emergency override code. Upload, 85%. Dominic looked at the screen. He needed 30 more seconds. Open the door. The guard screamed, leveling his weapon at Dominic through the glass. On the ground now. Dominic didn't get on the ground. He turned his back to them, shielding the terminal with his body. He watched the numbers tick up. 90%. 95%. Crash. The glass shattered. The door gave way under the battering ram. The guards rushed in, boots crunching on the shards. Hands. Show me your hands. Upload. 99%. Dominic felt the cold barrel of a rifle press against the back of his skull. He didn't raise his hands. He reached out and pressed the enter key. Upload complete. System secured. It's done, Dominic whispered. Then the rifle butt slammed into his kidney. Dominic crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. A heavy boot kicked him in the ribs, flipping him onto his back. He looked up to see Alistair Graves standing in the doorway, stepping over the broken glass. Graves looked immaculate in a navy suit, holding a cell phone. He looked down at Dominic with a sneer of pure disgust. You really are a cockroach, Kane, Graves said. I thought I exterminated you in Ohio. Dominic spat blood onto the pristine white floor. You missed. Graves didn't look angry. He looked amused. He signaled the guards. Pick him up and bring him to the boardroom. I think Ms. Greer needs a motivation to sign the papers. Graves dialed a number on his phone. He put it on speaker. In the safe house, Isabel's burner phone rang. She answered it immediately. Dominic. Not quite. Graves' voice purred through the line. But he's here. He looks a bit disjointed. I'm afraid he had a nasty fall in the server room. Isabel's blood turned to ice. If you touch him, Graves. I don't want to touch him, Isabel. I want to trade him. The vote is in 20 minutes. Come to the boardroom. Alone. No lawyers. No twins. There was a sound of a heavy thud and a muffled groan of pain from Dominic. Come alone. Graves repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. Or the next time you see your ex-husband, he'll be leaving the building from the roof. Without a parachute. The line went dead. Isabel lowered the phone. She looked at the twins. They were staring at her, their faces pale. They had heard everything. He saved the system, Julian said softly, pointing to the green light on his screen. The trap is set, but he's caught in it. Isabel grabbed her coat. She didn't look like a CEO anymore. She looked like a predator who had just been given a scent. Leo, she said, her voice deadly calm. Call the police. Tell them there is a hostage situation at the Greer Cane Tower. They won't get there in time, Leo warned. I know, Isabel said, walking to the door. But they'll be there in time to clean up the mess I'm about to make. The hallway leading to the boardroom on the 50th floor was lined with portraits of the men who had built Chicago. Their painted eyes watched Isabel Greer as she walked past them, her heels sinking into the plush carpet, silencing her approach. She wasn't wearing armor. She wasn't wearing the midnight blue velvet of revenge or the structural white silk of the gala. She was wearing a simple black trench coat over her street clothes, damp from the rain, her hair pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense knot. She didn't look like a CEO. She looked like a widow coming to collect a body. She pushed open the heavy mahogany doors. The boardroom was a theater of intimidation. The long table, carved from a single slab of black walnut, was empty except for 3 people at the far end. Alistair Graves sat at the head, looking bored, scrolling through his phone. Serafina Sterling sat to his right, wearing a cream-colored suit that cost more than Dominic's apartment, sipping a latte. And on the floor, kneeling between them like a prisoner of war, was Dominic. He had been beaten. His lip was split, bleeding onto the white collar of his shirt. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. But when Isabel walked in, he didn't look down in shame. He looked up, his eyes swollen but clear, and he shook his head slightly. Don't do it, his eyes pleaded. Don't sign. You're late, Graves said, not looking up from his phone. The vote is in 10 minutes. The board is waiting on the conference line. Let him go, Isabel said, her voice steady, though seeing Dominic like that made her stomach churn with a violent, protective rage. Sign first, Serafina chirped, sliding a document across the polished wood. It's a standard surrender of assets. You admit to the fraud. You transfer the voting rights to Alistair, and we agree not to press criminal charges against you or your accomplice. She gestured vaguely at Dominic with her coffee cup. Isabel walked toward the table. Every step was a calculation. She saw the guards standing in the shadows by the windows. She saw the camera in the corner, its red light blinking. Graves was recording this for posterity. He wanted her humiliation to be immortal. She reached the table and looked down at the document. Transfer of control, Greer Cane Dynamics. You really think this ends with a signature? Isabel asked, looking at Graves. You think you can just beat a man in a server room and steal $1 billion company? Graves finally looked up. His eyes were dead, shark-like things. Isabel, look around. I already have the company. I have the building. I have the accounts. This signature is just a formality to make the insurance adjusters happy. He leaned forward. And if you don't sign, I hand Dominic over to the police for corporate espionage. He broke into a secure server room. That's 20 years, easy. Do you really want the father of your children to die in a cage? Isabel looked at Dominic. He was breathing heavily, pain etched into every line of his face. He looked at the document, then at her. Let him rot, Dominic whispered through his split lip. Don't give them the twins' legacy. Graves kicked him under the table. Dominic groaned, curling in on himself. Stop. Isabel slammed her hand on the table. I'll sign. Just stop. Serafina smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression. She held out a heavy gold fountain pen. Good girl. I always knew you were smart enough to know when you were beaten. Isabel took the pen. It felt heavy and cold. She uncapped it. She bent over the document, the tip of the nib hovering over the signature line. Graves relaxed, leaning back in his chair, savoring his victory. Serafina pulled out her phone to take a picture. Little did they know, Isabel wasn't reading the surrender clause. She was checking the time. It was 7:59 a.m., the deadline for the server wipe. Just one question, Isabel asked softly, not looking up. Is the press watching? The press is in the lobby, Graves dismissed. Waiting for my victory statement. Good, Isabel said. I'd hate for them to miss the show. Isabel pressed the pen to the paper. But she didn't write Isabel Greer. She drew a single, sharp line through the entire paragraph of text. Then, she flipped the document over to the blank side. With broad, angry strokes, she wrote 3 words, "Motion to dismiss." She slammed the pen down. "Done." Graves frowned. He snatched the paper, expecting a signature. When he saw the thick black strike through, his face turned a violent shade of purple. "What is this?" Graves roared, standing up. "This isn't a signature. This is graffiti." "No, Alistair." A young voice rang out from the doorway. "That is a legal rejection of an invalid contract." Graves spun around. The double doors swung open. Leo and Julian walked in. They weren't alone. Behind them walked a dozen men and women carrying cameras, microphones, and lighting rigs. The press. The boys had led them up the freight elevator, bypassing the lobby security entirely. "Objection!" Julian shouted, pointing a finger at Graves. "You are holding a hostage in a private meeting. That is a felony, Mr. Graves. And you are doing it on a live stream." Graves looked at the cameras. The red lights were on. He was live. He froze, his politician's mask slipping for a fraction of a second. He quickly signaled the guards with his eyes to stand down, to hide Dominic, but it was too late. The cameras swiveled to the man kneeling on the floor, bleeding. "Get those cameras out of here," Serafina shrieked, jumping up to block the view. "This is a private meeting." "Actually," Leo said, stepping forward with a calmness that terrified the adults in the room. "As shareholders owning 40% of the voting stock via the Greer Family Trust, we authorized this press conference. We have a right to know why our father is tied up." Isabel moved. In the confusion, she grabbed a letter opener from the table and sliced the zip ties binding Dominic's hands. He gasped, rubbing his wrists, and struggled to his feet. He swayed, but Isabel caught him. She held him up, her arm around his waist, presenting a united front to the world. "You have no standing," Graves hissed, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Your father is a criminal. He broke into the server room to destroy evidence of your mother's fraud. He is a junkie and a thief, and nothing he says is admissible." "I didn't break in to destroy evidence," Dominic said. His voice was raspy, but it carried across the room, picked up by every microphone. "I broke in to save it." He reached into his jacket pocket, the one the guards hadn't checked because they were too busy beating him. He pulled out the small brass sobriety coin. But then he did something unexpected. He twisted the coin. It wasn't solid brass. It was a hollow container, a spy-craft relic he had bought from a paranoid survivalist in Oak Haven. The two halves unscrewed. From inside the hollow center, Dominic pulled out a tiny micro-SD card. The server room didn't just contain company accounts, Dominic said, holding the card up to the cameras. It contained the surveillance backups from 10 years ago, the audio logs from my office, the files I thought were lost when I was thrown out of my own company. Serafina's face drained of all color. She looked at the card, then at Dominic. She knew what was on those logs. "You're lying," she whispered. "Those were deleted." "You deleted the local copies, Serafina," Dominic said, his eyes hard. "But you forgot about the seismic backup. I built this tower. I know where the bodies are buried because I dug the graves." The room went silent, save for the clicking of camera shutters. Dominic stepped away from Isabel, standing on his own 2 feet. He looked at the camera, then at Serafina. 10 years ago, Dominic began, addressing the press directly. "I threw Isabel Greer out into a blizzard. I told the world she was a gold digger who trapped me. I destroyed her reputation to save my own stock price." He paused, taking a breath. "But I didn't do it because I wanted to. I did it because I was being blackmailed." A collective gasp went through the room. Serafina lunged forward. "Shut him up. Alistair, do something. He's slandering me." "Let him speak," a reporter shouted from the back. The woman standing there. Dominic pointed a shaking finger at Serafina. "Serafina Sterling. She wasn't just my fiancée. She was the one who introduced me to the investors who funded my first expansion. But there was a condition. She demanded access to my personal servers." He held up the SD card. "This card contains audio recordings from 10 years ago. Recordings of Serafina Sterling threatening to leak fabricated evidence of embezzlement if I didn't marry her. She needed my money to cover her father's gambling debts. She needed a puppet." "Liar," Serafina screamed, her composure shattering. "You were a drunk. You made it all up." "I was a drunk," Dominic admitted. "I drank to forget what a coward I was. I drank because I sold my wife and my unborn children for a safety net that didn't exist. He looked at the twins, his eyes filling with tears. But I'm sober now, and I kept the receipts. Julian walked up to the conference table. He plugged the SD card into the projector system. Click. A voice filled the room. It was younger, sharper, but unmistakably Seraphina's. Listen to me, Dom. You're going to kick her out tonight. If you don't, I send the file to the SEC. You'll go to prison for 10 years. Do you want your kid to be born in a jail cell? Be a man. Get rid of the trash, and I'll make you a king. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a reputation dying in real time. Graves looked at Seraphina. He looked at the press. He looked at the recording. He did the only thing a man like Alistair Graves could do. He stepped away from his wife. I had no knowledge of this, Graves announced to the cameras, smoothing his tie. If these allegations are true, Mrs. Graves has deceived me as well as the board. Alistair, Seraphina shrieked, grabbing his arm. Don't you dare. We're partners. We were partners in the acquisition, Graves corrected coldly, peeling her fingers off his suit. I do not partner with extortionists. Actually, Leo interrupted, his voice cutting through the drama. You don't have a partnership anymore, Mr. Graves. Because you don't have a company. Graves turned to the boy. Excuse me. While you were busy beating up our father and planning your victory speech, Leo said, tapping his tablet. My brother and I executed a little trade. You see, when you froze our mother's assets, you forgot to freeze the shell companies we set up last year. Julian smiled. We used the distraction of this hostile takeover to buy up the majority shares of your shipping logistics firm. The stock tanked this morning when rumors of your CEO's arrest started circulating. What arrest? Graves demanded. I haven't been arrested. Check your email, Julian said. Graves pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen. His face went white. The SEC, Graves whispered. Insider trading. We sent them the logs of you shorting your own stock before the takeover. Isabel said, stepping forward. You bet against yourself, Alistair. And you lost. The elevator doors opened again. This time, it wasn't the press. It was the FBI. Alistair Graves, Seraphina Sterling. A special agent announced, holding up a badge. You are under arrest for securities fraud, extortion, and kidnapping. As the handcuffs clicked onto Seraphina's wrists, she looked at Isabel. Her eyes were wild, filled with hate. You're nothing, she screamed as they dragged her out. You're just a waitress. Isabel didn't shout back. She didn't smile. She simply watched them go. I'm not a waitress, Isabel whispered to the empty room. I'm the one who served you the bill. The silence in the boardroom was no longer tense. It was stunned. The FBI agents stood by the door, allowing the moment to play out before executing the arrest warrants. Alistair Graves, the man who had terrified Chicago's financial district for 20 years, looked down at his phone with the expression of a man trying to read his own obituary. This is impossible, Graves stammered, his fingers swiping frantically across the screen. You can't buy Graves International. I have a poison pill defense. I have a staggered board. Julian stepped forward. He didn't look like a child anymore. He looked like the CEO of the future. He tapped the projector screen, bringing up a complex web of transaction logs. You did have a poison pill, Julian agreed, his voice calm and melodic. But you deactivated it yesterday. Graves froze. I what? To fund the acquisition of Greer Kane, Julian explained, pointing to a red line on the chart. You needed liquidity. You liquidated 15% of your own personal holdings in Graves International and bypassed the poison pill protocol to allow for a rapid capital injection. You thought you were moving money from your left pocket to your right pocket. Leo stepped up beside his brother. But you weren't selling to yourself, Mr. Graves. You were selling to us. We set up a purchasing algorithm, Julian continued. Every time you dumped stock to raise cash for this takeover, our shell companies, Nemesis Holdings, Vanguard Blue, and Phoenix Trust, bought it automatically. We didn't buy it all at once. We bought it in microtransactions over the last 48 hours. Isabel watched her sons, all mixing with a strange, cold pride. They hadn't just defended the castle. They had dug a tunnel under the enemy's camp and stolen their gunpowder. By the time you walked into this room, Leo finished, looking Graves in the eye, we had accumulated 51% of the voting shares of Graves International. You don't own your company anymore. We do. Graves dropped his phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. The shark had been eaten by the minnows. He looked at Isabel, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He realized then that he hadn't been fighting a woman. He had been fighting a dynasty. So, let me get this straight, Isabel said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room. She walked around the table until she stood directly in front of the man who had tried to destroy her family. You tried to steal my company by leveraging your own assets, but in your greed, you exposed your own flank. She picked up the document Graves had tried to force her to sign, the surrender. She ripped it in half. I think we need a new contract, Isabel said. Since Greer Kane Dynamics is now the parent company of Graves International, I have some personnel changes to announce. She looked at the FBI agents. Agent, I believe you have enough evidence for the arrest. The wire fraud, the kidnapping, the insider trading. More than enough, Ms. Greer, the lead agent said, stepping forward. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously in the quiet room. Wait, Graves shouted, backing away. I can cut a deal. I have information on other CEOs. I can give you the Sterling family. You have nothing. Serafina screamed, lunging at him with her manicured claws. You lost it all, you idiot. You promised me billions. The guards, Graves' own security team, didn't move to help him. They were mercenaries. They knew who signed the checks now. They stepped back, letting the FBI swarm the two villains. As the agents wrestled Graves and a screaming Serafina toward the door, Isabel turned to the twins. You bought his company, she whispered, still processing the sheer scale of the victory. With what money? We leveraged the debt, Julian said, shrugging as if it were a math homework problem. We used the value of the Greer Kane building as collateral. It was risky. If we had lost today, we would be homeless. But we didn't lose, Leo said, looking at his father. Dominic was leaning heavily against the conference table, his face gray, blood dripping steadily from his nose onto the expensive walnut wood. He looked at his sons, and for the first time, he smiled. A real, unburdened smile. Checkmate, Dominic whispered. Then, his eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the floor. Dominic. Isabel hit her knees, sliding across the polished floor to catch him before his head struck the ground. He was heavy, dead weight in her arms. His skin was clammy, cold sweat beading on his forehead. Call 911. Isabel shouted at the stunned board members. Get a medic up here now. The room dissolved into chaos. The reporters were being ushered out by security, but a few lingered, snapping photos of the fallen king. Leo and Julian ran to their father's side. They weren't calm anymore. The CEO masks dropped, revealing two terrified 11-year-old boys. Dad, Leo cried, grabbing Dominic's hand. Dad, wake up. Dominic's eyes fluttered open. He looked unfocused. He looked past Isabel, past the boys, staring up at the ornate ceiling of the tower he had built. Did we win? He rasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Yes, Isabel said, brushing the hair from his forehead, her hands stained with his blood. We won, Dominic. You did it. You saved us. Good. He sighed, his body relaxing, sinking deeper into the floor. The coin, give Leo the coin. Stay with me, Isabel ordered, her voice trembling. Do not close your eyes, Dominic Kane. You don't get to be the hero and die in the second act. That is not the script. The doors banged open. Paramedics rushed in, pushing a stretcher, their radios crackling with static. They swarmed around him, pushing Isabel back. BP is dropping. Possible internal hemorrhage. Get the line in. Isabel stood up, her black trench coat smeared with red. She pulled her sons into her, wrapping her arms around them, burying their faces in her coat so they wouldn't see the needles, the tubes, the fear. As they lifted Dominic onto the stretcher and wheeled him out, leaving a trail of blood on the carpet of the boardroom he used to rule, Isabel felt a strange, hollowing sensation in her chest. The war was over. The enemy was in chains. She owned the city. But as she watched the elevator doors close on the only man who had ever truly known her, she realized that victory felt terrifyingly like grief. Is he going to die? Julian asked, his voice small, muffled against her coat. Isabel looked at the empty room, at the ripped contract on the floor, at the white orchid still sitting on the desk down the hall. No, Isabel said, and this time it was a prayer. He's too stubborn to die. Hospitals smell of antiseptic and silence, a sharp contrast to the ozone and blood of the boardroom. Dominic Kane lay in a private room on the 12th floor of Northwestern Memorial. He had 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a severe concussion. But he was alive. Isabel stood by the window, watching the city below. It had been 3 days since the arrests. The news cycle was relentless. The ex-wife's revenge, the headlines screamed. Twin heirs to the empire. But inside this room, the noise faded. Dominic was awake, propped up by pillows. He looked older, thinner, but the darkness that had haunted his eyes for a decade was gone. He was watching Leo and Julian, who were sitting on the end of his bed, playing a game of chess on a magnetic travel board. Knight to e5, Julian said. You're exposing your queen, Dad. I'm sacrificing her, Dominic rasped, moving the piece. To clear the board for the rook. Isabel turned from the window. You shouldn't be teaching them to sacrifice, Dominic. You should be teaching them to win without bleeding. Dominic smiled, wincing slightly as his ribs shifted. Sometimes bleeding is the price of the win, Izzy. You taught me that. The door opened. A nurse walked in to check his vitals. Mr. Kane needs rest, she chided gently. You've been here for hours. We're leaving, Isabel said. She signaled the boys. They packed up the chess set, their movements synchronized. Will you come back tomorrow? Leo asked, looking at his father. It was a small question, but it carried the weight of a peace treaty. Try and stop me, Dominic said. Isabel walked the boys to the door, then turned back. She walked to the bedside table and placed a thick envelope on top of the plastic water pitcher. What's this? Dominic asked. Another lawsuit. It's a job offer, Isabel said. Consultant. Strategic Analysis Division. You'll report to the head of IT. Dominic opened the envelope. He scanned the contract. The salary. This is entry level, Izzy. It's less than I made when we were 22. You start at the bottom, Isabel said, her voice firm but not unkind. You build it back, brick by brick. You earn the trust. You earn the name. Dominic looked at the contract, then at her. Tears welled in his eyes. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He picked up the pen from the bedside table and signed his name. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me, Isabel said, walking to the door. Thank the board. It was a split vote. The twins broke the tie. 6 months later, Isabel Greer stood in the center of her office. The office that had once been Dominic's, then Serafina's, and was now undeniably hers. The white orchid on the desk was fresh. The city outside was bright with summer sun. She looked at the framed photo on her desk. It was taken last week at the company picnic. It showed Isabel, Leo, Julian, and Dominic. They weren't hugging. They weren't perfect. But they were standing together, a phalanx of resilience against the world. Dominic was working in the sub-basement IT department, slowly climbing the ladder he had once owned. He was sober. He was present. And every Friday, he played chess with his sons. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Greer, her assistant's voice filtered through. There is a courier here with a package. No return address. Security cleared it, but it's strange. Send it in. A young man walked in and placed a small, black velvet box on her desk. It looked identical to the one Dominic had sent her for the wedding invite 2 years ago. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. She opened the box. Inside, there was no ring, no threat, just a single, glossy photograph. It was a picture of the twins, taken from a distance. They were walking to school, laughing. The date stamp on the bottom right corner was today. Isabel turned the photo over. On the back, written in elegant, cursive script, were 3 words. Game not over. Isabel stared at the handwriting. It wasn't Dominic's. It wasn't Serafina's. It was handwriting she hadn't seen in 20 years. A chill ran down her spine. The Ghost Alliance hadn't just been Serafina and Graves. There was a third partner, someone who had been watching from the shadows long before the wedding. Isabel walked to the window. She looked down at the street, searching for a black car, a watcher, a sign. The city looked peaceful, but she knew better now. Peace is just the pause between wars. She picked up the phone. Get Dominic up here, Isabel commanded. And tell the boys to bring their laptops. We have a new player. Isabel smiled. She wasn't afraid. She was the phoenix. And if the world wanted to burn her down again, she would simply use the fire to light the way. And that, my beautiful family, is where we leave them. Not at the end, but at a new beginning. Because true strength isn't about never falling. It's about building a foundation so strong that even the earthquakes can't shake you. If this story reminded you that your resilience is your greatest weapon, please hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notifications. Don't let the world make you feel small. You are a giant in the making. And if you want to know who sent that photo, if you want to see who is coming for the queen next, drop a part 3 in the comments. If we get enough of you, we might just have to open that velvet box one more time. I love you. I appreciate you. And remember, bricks are heavy, but they can always be res-tacked. See you in the next one.